Okay, it's 2 o'clock. We'll give a couple more minutes, but I wanted to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. This is our third live webinar, and today is going to be a little bit different. We wanted to have an interactive conversation about how to transition from traditional leadership to a more inclusive, positive change and conscious leadership. Today with me is my good friend, Todd Vromam. Before I let you introduce yourself, I wanted to thank you for joining me today. And I also want to take a quick moment to introduce myself. My name is Adriana Vaccaro, and I am the founder of Culture Redesign. Culture is my absolute favorite subject in the whole entire world, and I am very passionate about what I do. Our approach to helping organizations become a more fulfilling workplace involves 3 factors: employee engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and behavioral science. And we do believe that that combination really takes the approach to a very practical level, so that we go beyond the posters and the claim of culture and take it into a real delivery of change. And now, Todd, again, thank you for joining us. And if you can take a moment to introduce yourself and your company.
Sure. Well, thank you, Adriana, for having me. I appreciate it. And I can definitely attest to the fact that you are incredibly passionate about what you do and good at it. But thank you for having me. So my name's Todd Vromam. I'm the owner of Adesso Associates, and I'm an organizational psychologist that ultimately we feed into culture as part of it, but I'm kind of the elements as well, supporting its strategy, structure, process, basically harnessing human behavior to hit the bottom line and make it a good place to work.
Thank you, Todd.
Hopefully managing change, I guess, right?
Right. So
yeah,
change is difficult, and getting something to stick is I think is where the value of your work really gets to be noticed. So let's talk about that transition from traditional leadership to a progressive style of leadership. And from my perspective, one of the main differences between the 2 approaches is that inclusivity and that concept of sharing power. The decision-making historically falls on the shoulders of the executive team or the leadership team. So when we are embracing inclusive leadership, we are trying to bring other voices and elevate other voices and create safe spaces for other employees to give their opinion on a decision that is going to be made. And that can be challenging, not only for the decision makers, but also for the people trying to participate in the process, because they don't know when it is appropriate to really tell their honest opinion, or if it's better to kind of fit into the mold and agree with the person that has power. From your psychological perspective, what do you think is maybe a suggestion or something you think employees can do or leaders can do to really embrace that inclusivity?
I think one of the biggest things for leaders to understand in the process of going through that is the importance of clear communication throughout the process and ingraining it in the culture, really. And I know you can talk to that part, but for me, the use of communication, we're using communication as a means, right, to exchange information. And it kind of allows everyone to be included if you do it correctly, right? And and that could take on multiple forms, from social media to emails to team meetings to company meetings, whatever it might be, right? But you can create, no matter what someone's background is, a feeling of belonging that can be, fostered through communication.
Thank you. I agree. I also think in terms of helping a group of people move towards inclusive leadership, you need to have that functional part that sometimes we think is going to come sort of spontaneously, but I think having standard operating procedures, having really behaviors that promote inclusivity and that are modeled consistently by the leaders, that is what really creates that space of safety for employees to give their opinion and participate in the process. I believe when we are trying to invite employees to give their opinion, and I've seen it in my work, like the first couple of meetings, a director will say, you know, does anybody have any comments, any feedback? And they get nothing, right? So I always say, don't ask the question only one time and not only at one meeting, because then eventually they're going to assume nobody's going to say anything. So just keep consistently asking questions. And then eventually when people see your consistency, they are going to participate more and feel safe giving their opinion. In terms of managing a transition, Todd, I wanted to ask you, how do you support an organization through what we can call a cultural transformation?
I think it is the managing change, right? There's so many elements to it, but I do believe it's, you know, preparing them for the change, you know, and taking them through and managing the change, right? And developing a plan to actually execute and take action, right? Because the last thing you want to do is start talking about something and then not follow through, right? That would be even worse. And then I think the other part's reinforcing it, right? So, and there's a lot of elements through there. And we already talked about communication as one, but coaching and being able to have key people that are, that we can identify in organizations to be basically our sponsors, right? The people who are going to be our champions of change and are living it versus just talking about it.
Now let's bring into the fold. I asked a couple of people to let me know what will make this webinar really valuable. And one of the points I received was, how does this affect turnover? Turnover is a big problem. It's been a big problem since the pandemic started. And even though we're sort of over it now, like it was great resignation, now we're talking about quiet quitting. And even I have experienced it myself. Employees that seem engaged today, I think the market is so attractive now that even an employee that is engaged might get an opportunity that they really cannot refuse. Sometimes these are life-changing opportunities. And I don't think that is a reflection only on the market, but also if we want that employee to stay because of the leadership that is in place, I think there are initiatives that we can have in place. But one of the things I have noticed in terms of training, we talk a lot about training, but I always like to clarify, is not one and done, and is not 1 hour of inclusive leadership and now you're going to change the company. Is what can we do to collaborate and to create the next step that is going to stay in the company and survive that turnover. And it's a force that is so strong that if your employee leaves, the employee that comes, the new employee that comes in is going to be sort of embrace and absorb that new positive change. And that is, to me, that is the value of inclusive leadership. So in your opinion, Todd, how can we take training from transfer of information approach and make it something that goes beyond that?
More engagement, basically. I mean,
yes,
is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Training itself. Well, is that what you're asking? Just training itself? I just want to make sure. All right. Yeah, because I think making it more engaging as much as possible. And I say that because not just going to a class or not just going online, right? And not being aware, right, of what you're actually putting in front of people and when they can do it and how they can actually perform the training, right? So to engage them on their level, meet them where they're at as much as you can, and deliver it in different mediums, so that some people may not like to be in a large group and doesn't learn well that way, or if they got picked out of a crowd, that would be not one of the best things potentially for a certain thing. Or
that is a good point. Sometimes I feel like with training, at times it becomes like something else the employee has to do, so it's almost not exciting for them. A lot of what we do relies on the power of employee engagement. So we at Cultural Redesign try to implement a lot of behavioral science. So according to that research, employee engagement is defined as that emotional commitment and connection between the employee and the company, and that goes beyond, obviously we need salary and benefits and other things, but it goes beyond the transactional approach and is more of an emotional connection. For companies implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion, I will recommend that value alignment between my individual values as a person and the values of the company. I think when we find that alignment, we are able, and I try not to use the word authentic because I think it's overused and overutilized, but there is value in being authentic. If you really have that alignment, I think you get there by showing up who you are, but you can only achieve that level of belonging and alignment if there is a sort of value recognition. What is your process, Todd, to help organizations gain clarity on their core values? I think that part of your work is very important.
Yeah, this is it's interesting. Even companies that might have we went through it, we developed our values kind of attitude, right? Typically, the first step is if they have any, right? So assessing what there is or isn't. And once we're there, it is working with leadership and people throughout the company, right? So I'll typically go as far as, and I'll call it an intervention, right? A group dynamic or a group intervention that we can actually go ahead and explore together and develop it together. And almost, if they're already established, it's almost reinforcing them anyway, if we came to the same end. But it's taking people from across the organization, from different walks of life, right, as diverse as we can possibly get, and either reaffirming or actually developing them together. And then from there, it becomes more of a communicating them and aligning them, right, with the organization and what they're trying to achieve, and then also aligning with what your employees value, right? So, and that's pretty broad now, right? Especially with the younger generation, right? The whole work-life balance and everything really seeps in. So it's an interesting time right now in work.
Absolutely. So let's talk about cultivating that sense of belonging through inclusive leadership. And a lot of what I have learned working with different clients and different organizations, that holistic approach for a leader to kind of mitigate their own biases that are always present, even if we don't have an ill intention. Biases, that is there to protect us and to help us during the decision-making process. So how do we become aware of that, mitigate it, and promote a more holistic view of the individual? And one of the things we usually recommend is looking at each person, looking at each employee, not only what is on their resume and their education, their experience, and even though that has a lot of value, it shouldn't be the only decision-making factor. I think also understanding the behavioral pattern of each person. Scientifically, we all have a very different behavioral pattern, and that defines how we will approach work. So when we understand what the priority is for each person, we are able to train them better, coach them better, develop them to the highest level of ability. And the last part is who we are as a human, right? Like that story upbringing, if they come from another country, if they were raised in a different language, if they are part of a marginalized group, like how do we become aware of those differences and try to create a path that promotes equity? So it's not about giving everyone the same. And I think that was more the traditional leadership style, was like, we have a handbook and we give everyone the same and the rules are for everyone. It's more about how do we give each individual what that person needs today, considering their past, their experience, their trauma. And it's a lot, it's a big undertaking to really make it possible in a company and to really have that strong commitment. It takes a lot of time and effort. But I think inclusive leadership is successful when it's part of what every person in the company is practicing, not only the boss or the director or the HR team, but every person is trying to take a more inclusive approach. How can we help the next person? How can we amplify different voices? And I also believe that real employee engagement gets to that level when collectively as a company, we get to a higher level of commitment to the goals and commitment to the mission and the vision of the company. That purpose-driven approach to work, I think that really makes a major difference. Todd, another question for you. If a company wants to cultivate a sense of belonging as part of the objectives of their inclusive leadership, what do you recommend?
Well, I think number one is education, right? But I think I'll go back and talk about communication a little bit more, right? Because I think that's, part of that, off of that offshoot is creating a supportive environment, right? I think a company really has to go out of their way, right? They need to be in a mode where they're being an intent to create that environment and do things like supporting differences of people, right? The use of pronouns or actually greeting people by their name, right? Their actual name, which is hard sometimes, right? People have some different names that may not know, especially a leader who might be a little bit more distant, right, from the employee as far as interaction day to day. But I think also promoting collaboration and encouraging collaboration and basically promoting participation to the best of your ability, right? As a company and as a leader. So those might be some areas for me that I would say be a little more inclusive leadership, if we're trying to impart that a little more.
Thank you for that. So we always bring up the intentionality of culture. I think culture, and well, some of us know this, some of us believe that culture happens sort of naturally. And yes, it does happen naturally. It's just the result might not be what you expected if you don't become intentional about that type of work. So a company having values that have been established and communicated and having the claim on the website of the culture they want to promote, I think that is the first step. That is your claim of culture. But then there is another dimension of how are we supporting that claim with our procedures and our communication and the training that we are providing. And even a step beyond that will be the norm. When an employee comes in day one, are they experiencing the culture that we are claiming to have on the website, or are they experiencing something completely different? And I think that is the value of employee engagement and having sort of tracking and bringing data, which sometimes can be a little black and white. It takes a little bit of the sentiment out of it. Even though we're trying to find out the sentiment, we come up with numbers, and and how well or not so well received they are, it is a baseline, right? It just gives us a point, a starting point of where our leadership is going and maybe what levers we can move. As I said at the beginning, this is an open conversation, but I wanted to share one framework on inclusive conversations that I think it has been powerful to me in my work, in my parenting, and when I am trying to connect with other people. If you become aware of it, again, for me personally, once you are aware of it, you kind of like hear your brain giving you at times the wrong advice. And that quick framework I wanted to share is we listen instead of trying to relate immediately, which our brain is trying to do. Someone tells you a story and you immediately looking through your files. How can I relate? How can I relate? Instead of relating, replacing that with validating what the other person is saying. And I think even something as simple as validating a person's opinion, you don't need to agree or disagree. You are just letting them know you heard their opinion is valued. And also ask, are you looking for help? Are you just trying to vent? Like sometimes the person talking to us has an objective, and instead of assuming what that objective is, trying to really clarify and get what the other person is looking for. To me, that makes a big difference when a leader has that inclusive approach and the conversation becomes about the other person more than about what we are looking to gain from that. That was a little kind of like off the script, but I just wanted to share that framework. So we talk about culture initiatives to increase productivity. They promote cohesive teams, and research supports that you have more innovation in the workplace. Happier employees, happier and committed employees are able to take the organization to a different place because client retention is better and usually revenue is also higher. Is there anything, Todd, from a practical approach, considering your years of experience, in addition to higher performance and higher retention of employees, any other benefits that you consider relevant from embracing an inclusive leadership style?
Oh, there's probably too many to mention, but I'm from health, mental health, physical health. I think that's huge, right? I mean, and the two you noted are gigantic. So it really does impact people in a dramatic way, physically and mentally and emotionally, to have an inclusive leadership team and culture that is supportive, because as we know, things are hard, right? Especially now, it's very confusing in the world, a lot of stuff happening. And this is a place where ultimately, we're put in a position where we've got to do a little more as leaders in organizations and create the safe space, right, by being inclusive. So.
Right. I've also noticed that when creating those spaces, I think we need to think not only as the leaders putting the spaces or the benefits out there, but also if we were going to use the benefit, when will we do it? And I was at an event last night and they were talking about, students actually were talking about how they have counselors and they have all these great resources, but they can never access, they really don't have access to them because they're only there while the students are taking classes. So they have to decide, do I show up to my AP class or do I miss class and go see the counselor? So I think sometimes the practicality of what is the value of having access to mental health if it's only in a time frame that is not relevant to the person that is going to use it. And that really resonated with me last night, of trying to look at everything we put out there for employees as if we were an employee trying to use that benefit. Does this make sense? Like, should this be maybe during working hours? If mental health is really important to an employer, maybe we should offer access to those benefits during the workday. I'm not saying nobody's doing that, but I'm just saying it really made me reflect on a different approach to a roundtable or a DI committee or different things that I help companies with. It's almost like we're giving the employee extra work. Now you have to work all day and then join the DI committee Zoom at 7 p.m. Why don't we do it during the day? So just a reflection on inclusive leadership. And I want to open it for if anybody has questions. We wanted this to be interactive and sort of practical. And Todd has a lot of experience, many, many years of experience. We have one question here. Thanks for the conversation. I always struggle with the term inclusive because in the end, who gets to include or exclude whom? I love that question. I'm gonna give my answer first, and then you give yours.
I think you should. It's more your ball. Yeah. Why don't you? Yeah.
I think it's more about when we feel, and I personally have felt left out many ways. Maybe not because somebody was trying to make me feel left out. It's sort of a feeling we have, and sometimes we give it to ourselves, or sometimes if you're the only woman in a room, or if you're the only person with an accent, you tend to feel left out, not because people want to exclude you. But I can say that when an environment is receptive, a group is receptive of uncertainty and change, that feeling of inclusion is not who is making me feel included. It's connected to the concept of psychological safety. And the difference between psychological safety and trust is that trust is individual. You either trust someone or you don't. Psychological safety is when you are in a group, is the group giving you the feeling of safetyness. And I think it's the same with inclusion. When you walk into anything, it doesn't have to be the workplace. When you walk into a restaurant, do you feel like you belong there? That you should be there and not like the odd person or the penguin around multiple dogs. And to me, that is the concept of inclusion. But I love that that comment of who is making you feel included or not included. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Anything else you want to share? We have a couple of questions here. What is a first step that can be implemented today that most leaders can take to be more inclusive?
Good
Stephen
question.
I have to say this. I love this man that is on the webinar. He was such a mentor for me. I think giving an opportunity, and he gave me an opportunity at one point. I think giving opportunities to employees that others might not, and I'm not talking about only race or gender or education or what school you went to, but just taking the time to be open-minded and letting people find their way and shine. Everybody has that potential for brilliance and excellence, so just be open to letting them find their way there. I have another one. I hear safe space used a lot in the workplace. How do you define safe space? I define it by a space where uncertainty is welcome, where you don't have to feel or spend a lot of energy suppressing who you are, but instead you can show up and express your opinions freely. And those opinions might not be the same opinions of the person next to you. We don't have to agree on anything, but just having the ability to express what you're thinking, to me, that is a safe space. Todd, do you want to share your definition of a safe space?
No, I think that was, you said it very well, actually. One thing I was thinking, actually a question back, if you will, about the what leaders can do to be more inclusive. I think one of the biggest things that people can do is get to know their people, right? I hate to say, right, just get out and talk to some people, because that in itself, right, humanizes what's happening on a day-to-day basis, right? And I'm not just the person in the whatever, in the company that sits in a cube that does work, right? And you put paperwork on. So sorry, I digress. The safe space thing, I liked what you said. I mean, it's definitely one of those, it does lead right back to psychological safety, right? And being in touch with your people and what they're experiencing. Like you said, what are they actually experiencing in the culture or not? And that takes many forms, right? So I don't know if I have a better definition as the bottom line, but
thank you. We have another question. How do you get started on developing company values? I'll share first. I usually start with a feeling. What is it that you want your employees to feel? And why do I start with a feeling? Because if we start with the value, sometimes sort of the vibe or the environment we want to create is very different from one company to a different company. I have clients that are completely devoted to innovation and creativity, and the feeling that they want is that sort of for people to throw ideas and never feel that they shouldn't share. That's what they're looking for. I have another client, the company I'm with today, actually, they're more about a family environment. They want employees to feel part of a bigger family, kind of like togetherness, but at the same time, like everything else in a family, there are those levels of power. So I think if you get clear on what feeling you want to have, are we going for competitiveness, innovation? I think that's a good place to start, and then you can get to what behaviors you want to see on your employees. Do you really want them to give you all their ideas, or do you want to continue with the sort of establish the mission and having them be more of followers that believe in what you believe? So I think it's a combination of the being clear on the feeling you want to see from your employees and the behaviors you want them to demonstrate when they are at work. From your experience, Todd, anything you want to share on how to define company values?
Or how to start to do it? I mean, or things that should be included as well. I think it goes without saying, because we're talking about it, but it should advance equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? Period. The values themselves have to do that. And I guess I'm saying something similar to what you said, but the way I word it is, they should represent who you are or who you want to be as a company and as people when you're at your best. So, and that feeds into what you said as far as a feeling, right? So that's because you may not know what that looks like, and it's not just numbers, right? So it's when I'm at my best. So those are two elements I might add.
Right. I usually recommend when we are doing a workshop for sort of how to define your values, I ask the leadership team or whoever is involved in the exercise to describe, if the company was a person, what values will that person have? And if the company was one of your employees, and we give it a name and we create a whole avatar just to get clarity on what are the behaviors they want to see consistently, not one day right after a training, but consistently the behaviors that you want your employees to embrace. I think, we have, how do you measure if your company values are really being carried out? I think turnover is a great way to measure if your company values are being carried out, because even though, yes, I agree, the market is volatile and shortage of people and all these other factors, there is still a portion of that turnover that I think is represented by the lack of alignment between an employee and the values of that company. And I think if a lesson was learned from the pandemic, is the fact that employees don't go to work just for a paycheck. We need that engagement and commitment to something greater. So I think if you have really nicely written values on a poster, but you have a lot of conflict on the floor, you have a lot of turnover, you have a lot of corrective action going on, you have a lot of employees that are leaving the workplace, I think that is an invitation to become more mindful and maybe either revisit the values or invite the employees to kind of like revive that commitment to the values of the company. Anything you want to add on that question, Todd?
No,
how to measure
that. Yeah, just getting the feedback. I think really understanding whatever means that is, right? And I would do multiple avenues as a company to get the feedback, from one-on-one to surveys, anything, groups of people, whatever it might be. So you can see it at different levels, and the measures you said, of course, you're right in there, right? If we have a lot of turnover, we're probably not hitting the mark in some shape or form. So anyway, there are a number of ways you can actually, and I think even taking it all and looking at it as it tells a story no matter what, right? It's not just one or the other, right? Are we all carried out, or some of them are being carried out, right? Or who knows, right? That's, you can paint that picture with the different means of data that you can gain.
I'll tell you from a, as a consultant, and for you as well, Todd, we come in and sometimes we work with clients together. We come in and we hear a story, and something we hear often when we're talking about values is like, yes, 3 years ago, we had a consultant came in, like a lot of conversations start like that, which is great that, you remember when those values started. But if you think about that, the last 3 years, a lot of things have happened, and just having a document that has your values is not the same as having practices and procedures and sort of exercising them every day. And as a leader, for you to be modeling those values in all your interactions. So I think making it part of the onboarding process, just the same way you teach a new employee how to access their email, I think they should have that conversation of what the values are and what does it mean to embrace them. Not only read through them, but what can you start doing today to kind of like be part of that group of people embracing the values. I think that was the last question. And if we don't have any final questions, I want to share Todd's information on the chat. So I'm going to add it right here. He is also on LinkedIn, and he is great. So if anybody wants to talk to him about culture or change management or psychological safety training, I know he has access to workforce training and development grants as well. So I definitely encourage you to talk to him. At the same time, if you want to talk to one of us, cultureredesign.com, and my email is Adriana at cultureredesign.com. I'm adding Todd's email here. Any closing remarks, Todd, while I write your email?
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you very much for having me, and I'm glad you're championing this cause, because I can't think of anything more important, honestly, right now than really looking at the culture and then what role that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has in this to support a healthy workplace. So thank you, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone that attended. We'll send out the recording, and your feedback is always welcome.